Okay, we're going to just take, hopefully, just a few minutes to finish reading and filling in our chart in the book. I hope you had a chart. I didn't realize that there are no charts left that were printed. But at any rate, you will be able, if you like, when we get done with this, and you would like a whole filled-in chart, you're welcome to email me, and I will send you one. If you don't email me, I will not send you one. So, because even if you told me at the back door, I'd forget by the time I got home. So you have to email me. All right, so where we are in the book, you might remember that everything right now is at a turning point. We have Haman, who thought this particular day when he got up early and went into the king, hoping to get an agreement from the king that he could kill Mordecai before he went to dinner with the king and with Esther. And instead, the king asked him who he could honor. And of course, Haman, being the arrogant ding-dong that he is, he thought surely he would be the only one the king would want to honor. And he said, well, I just think he ought to be robed with the royal robes, especially a robe the king had already worn, and let him be paraded through the streets, etc. And of course the king says, well, do that for Mordecai, and so here we are, chapter 6, verse 10. Haman goes back to his house and is bemoaning the fact that he's in this condition, and Haman's wife says, well, I know I told you to build a gallows, but now you're gonna you're gonna fall before them. So you see this turning point there. So chapter 6 verse 10, chapter 6 verse 14. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived. They quickly brought Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman came to dine with Queen Esther. On the second day of the banquet of wine, the king asked Esther, "What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your petition? Ask for up to half the kingdom, and it shall be done." Queen Esther replied, "If I have met with your approval, O king, and if the king is so inclined, grant me my life as my request, and my people as my petition. For we have been sold, both I and my people, to destruction and to slaughter and to annihilation. If we had simply been sold as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for such distress would not have been sufficient for troubling the king." And then King Ahasuerus responded to Queen Esther, "Who is this individual? Where is this person to be found who is presumptuous enough to act in this way?" And Esther replied, "The oppressor and enemy is this evil Haman." Then Haman became terrified in the presence of the king and the queen. Enraged, the king arose from the banquet of wine and withdrew to the palace garden. Meanwhile, Haman stood to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he realized that the king had now determined a catastrophic end for him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet of wine, Haman was throwing himself down on the couch where Esther was lying. The king exclaimed, "Will he also attempt to rape the queen while I am still in the building?" As these words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Indeed, there is the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke out on the king's behalf. It stands near Haman's home and is 75 feet high." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the very gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. The king's rage was abated. All right. Take just a second and take 60 seconds. Write down 2 or 3 events. We're not looking for applications here. That's what you messed David up with last time. We're not looking for details. We're looking for what are the events here. Just jot them down on your chart. and so that you have that before you. Okay, good. What are what events do you see? Just broad events that you can write down so you can follow the storyline. What events take place here?
Esther gives a feast.
Pardon?
Esther gives her second feast to the king.
Okay, Esther has the second feast. So now we've had the first feast the day before. Now we have the second feast. All right. Next.
Her request is for her life and for people's life.
Okay, interesting way she requests. She says, well, I just want to request that you saved my life. You can imagine the king being a little, what? With that little statement? Yeah, please save my life and the life of my people. So we have Esther's request then.
King gets angry.
Yeah. Now the king, well, the first thing king does is say, who is this person? He has no idea. That's give you an idea of how clued in he is to his kingdom's events. But who is this person? And of course, can you imagine being Haman at that moment? And she says, it's this wicked Haman. Almost reminds you of Nathan the prophet with his words, his parable to King David, and says, you are the man. So here's that. And then finally, okay, so not Mordecai. Yeah, so Haman gets hanged on his own gallows. Just before that, what does Haman do? He throws himself on the couch where Esther is, pleading with her. And as we could say dozens of times throughout the story, it just so happened the king walked in right at that time. You know, if they'd make a decent movie on this, it would be so much fun. Saw a movie on it just a few months ago to see how they came up with it, and they ruined the story so badly, it was absolutely ridiculous. So there you go. All right, so those are our events. Let's go on to chapter 8. Let me see. I'll put these up here as I put them up. Yeah.
Would you talk about the reversal of pride and what it ended up being? Just
No.
a flash.
Yeah, I know. That'll be something we'll talk about later. That's oops, don't do that. I can't believe I just hit the back button and it just erased everything I had up there. All right, I'll keep pushing this button while I read. All right, chapter 8, verse 1. In that same day, King Ahasuerus gave the estate of Haman the adversary to the estate of Haman, the adversary of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Now Mordecai had come before the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king then removed his signet ring, the very one he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther designated Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's estate. Then Esther again spoke with the king, falling at his feet. She wept and begged him for mercy, that he might nullify the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the plot that he had intended against the Jews. When the king extended to Esther the golden scepter, she arose and stood before the king. She said, "If the king is so inclined, and if I have met with his approval, and if the matter is agreeable to the king, and if I am attracted to him, let an edict be written rescinding those recorded intentions of Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote in order to destroy the Jews who are throughout all the king's provinces. For how can I watch the calamity that will befall my people, and how can I watch the destruction of my relatives?" King Ahasuerus replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Look, I have already given Haman's estate to Esther, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he took hostile action against the Jews. Now write in the king's name whatever in your opinion is appropriate concerning the Jews, and seal it with the king's signet ring. Any decree that is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be rescinded." And the king's scribe were quickly summoned, and in the third month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, they wrote out everything that Mordecai instructed to the Jews and to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces, all the way from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces in all, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, and to the Jews according to their own script and their own language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring. He then sent letters by couriers who rode royal horses that were very swift. The king thereby allowed the Jews who were in every city to assemble and to stand up for themselves, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any army of whatever people or province that should become their adversaries, including their women and children, and to confiscate their property. This was to take place on a certain day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. A copy of the edict was to be presented as law throughout each and every province and made known to all peoples, so that the Jews might be prepared on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who were riding the royal horses went forth with the king's edict without delay, and the law was presented in Susa, the citadel, as well. Now Mordecai went out from the king's presence in blue and white royal attire, with a large golden crown and a purple linen mantle. The city of Susa shouted with joy, for the Jews were radiant happiness and joyous honor. Throughout every province and throughout every city where the king's edict and his law arrived, the Jews experienced happiness and joy, banquets and holidays. Many of the resident peoples pretended to be Jews because the fear of the Jews had overcome them. Okay, quickly, write down key events in this chapter so that you can, at least when you look back at it, can see the story and how it took place. Okay? First main event. Okay, so everything now is given over to Esther. So we have Mordecai's exalted with the king's signet ring, and everything is switched from Haman now to Mordecai and to Esther. And we're seeing, of course, again, just as was mentioned by Wayne, this major reversal that is taking place. What next?
Esther asked the king to revoke the law.
Okay, so the king is that king. He asks the king. She asks the king to revoke the law, and then he does what? Says, here's the signet ring. Write it however you want it, right? So you just go around. So Mordecai writes a royal decree to the Jews to defend themselves and take vengeance on their enemies. So everything now is rejoicing throughout the whole area, and Mordecai is actually honored as royalty. He comes out of the royal palace, and he looks like royalty, and everything is just absolutely amazing because Mordecai and his people now can defend themselves against what is about to happen. All right? Anything else? Okay.
Many rejoiced with them.
Yes, and so rejoicing is so much, it's such a reversal. There's a lot of people go, I think I'm a Jew too. So yeah, there's that major change. All right, good. Let's go 9:1. In the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on its 13th day, the edict of the king and his law were to be executed. You might remember that's the day that Haman had chosen to kill the Jews. So this is the same day now the Jews are allowed to defend themselves. It was on that day that the enemies of the Jews had supposed that they would gain power over them, but contrary to expectations, the Jews gained power over their enemies. The Jews assembled themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to strike out against those who were seeking their harm. No one was able to stand before them, for dread of them fell on all the peoples. All the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who performed the king's business were assisting the Jews, for the dread of Mordecai had fallen on Mordecai was of high rank in the king's palace, and word about him was spreading throughout all the provinces. His influence continued to be greater and greater. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, bringing death and destruction, and they did as they pleased with their enemies. In Susa, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. In addition, they also killed Parshenthadath and Dalphon and Aspiath and all of those guys. And verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Amadatha, and the enemy of the Jews, but they did not confiscate their property. On that same day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was brought to the king's attention. Then the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the king, Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? What is your request? It shall be given to you. What other petition do you have? It shall be done. Esther replied, if the king is so inclined, let the Jews who are in Susa be permitted to act tomorrow, also according to today's law, and let them hang the 10 sons of Haman on the gallows. So the king issued orders for this to be done. A law was passed in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa then assembled on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not confiscate their property. The rest of the Jews who were throughout the provinces of the king assembled in order to stand up for themselves and to have rest from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of their adversaries, but they did not confiscate their property. All this happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Then they rested on the 14th day and made it a day of banqueting and happiness. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and 14th days and rested on the 15th, making it a day for banqueting and happiness. This is why the Jews who are in the rural country, those who live in rural villages, set aside the 14th day of the month of Adar for happiness, banqueting, a holiday, and sending gifts to one another. Mordecai wrote these matters down and sent letters to all the Jews who were throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to have them observe the 14th and the 15th days of the month of Adar each year as the time when the Jews gave themselves rest from their enemies, the month when their trouble was turned to happiness and their mourning to a holiday. These were to be the days of banqueting, happiness, sending gifts to one another, and providing for the poor. So the Jews committed themselves to continuing what they had begun to do and to what Mordecai had written them. For Haman, the son of Amadatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised plans against the Jews to destroy them. He had cast Pur, that is the lot, in order to afflict and destroy them. But when the matter came to the king's attention, the king gave written orders that Haman's evil intentions that he had devised against the Jews should fall on his own head. He and his sons were hanged on the gallows. For this reason, these days are known as Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, because of the account found in this letter and what they had faced in this regard and what had happened to them, the Jews established as binding on themselves, their descendants, and all who joined company that they should observe these 2 days without fail, just as written at the appropriate time on an annual basis. These days were to be remembered and to be celebrated in every generation and in every family, every province, and every city. The Jews were not to fail to observe these days of Purim. The remembrance of them was not to cease among the descendants. So Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the empire of Ahasuerus, words of true peace, to establish these days of Purim in their proper times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established, and just as they had established both for themselves and their descendants matters pertaining to fasting and lamentation. Esther's command established these matters of Purim, and the matter was officially recorded. Okay, a lot of details there, but just write down quickly the main events. Okay? What events quickly did you see just to complete the story here? Okay, yeah. The day came and they defended themselves quite well. That's right. What else?
Purim is established. Do you remember the day?
Okay, so they established this Feast of Purim in order to remember that, give that command that goes out through the entire empire. Exactly. Just before that.
Esther, you can do anything else? And she said, let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again tomorrow. So Esther goes, well, killing 500 in Susa wasn't quite enough. Why don't we do that again tomorrow? And how many did they kill that time? 75,000. Whew.
Well, in Susa it was 300.
Yeah, 300 more in Susa, but altogether they had 75,000 that are then killed. And so you have the vengeance taken then against their enemies. What do you see with Mordecai here?
He was honored.
He is honored more and more. He's exalted more and more. Everybody through the empire. Of course, we hear of rejoicing through the empire. They've been protected, and everything then has been satisfied. So Jews victorious over the enemies. 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman are killed, and then Esther requests an extra day of vengeance on the enemies, and 75,000 is killed, and Haman's sons are hanged, and then feasting and gladness, and the Feast of Purim is inaugurated. Chapter 10 is huge, as you can see. Just have three verses there. So King Ahasuerus then imposed forced labor on the land and on the coastlands of the sea. Now all the actions carried out under his authority and his great achievements, along with an exact statement concerning the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king promoted, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus. He was the highest ranking Jew, and he was admired by his numerous relatives. He worked enthusiastically for the good of his people and was an advocate for the welfare of all his descendants. And so here's basically the epilogue of the book, which emphasizes the high popularity of Mordecai, and we see then the vengeance of the Jews against their enemies have been satisfied. The thing there that should strike us as at the bottom of your chart, some interesting moral discrepancies, is just the way that Queen Esther gets revenge or takes vengeance on the enemies. And you see her saying, well, it's just not enough for that one day to do all the killing we need to get done. And so you see that. You see a growth in Esther, her strength, her power, her forthrightness. She's no longer this timid little girl who sits back and says, well, I'm kind of scared to go before the king. She keeps going before the king. After that first event, she gains quite a bit of strength during that time. Okay, and top part of the chart, we just look at some section summaries here. You would see the first two chapters, the rise of Esther, and then the emphasis on the hopelessness in Israel as everything looks absolutely desperate. And then you have reversal and rescue, and then finally God's unseen victory. And we'll talk more about this idea of providence, of God's victory through this, even though God is not part of any part of the story, any acknowledgement of God whatsoever. Okay, so hopefully you have the story better in your mind. You can see this. I think it's really valuable to have a chart like this. And if you have that, in fact, Deborah took a picture of it. That's a great way. Flip your phone out and take a picture. Take a picture of it and you'll have that. But it's good to have that before your mind, because you want to be able to see the flow then of the chart. Okay, any final things? We're not talking about applications yet, but any final things you wanted to note, that you thought we ought to note on the chart as far as the overview of the book? Everybody good with that? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do now is switch over to you might remember when we started this, I said I'm not going to give you the introduction yet. So now we want to look at the broad picture of the things we should notice as far as the uniqueness of this particular book. So the things that we want to see, they're unique. And so that's the chart that that's the pages that I handed out for you. And that's what we will now take a look at and go up the screen just in our last 15 minutes. So let me escape this. And like I said, if you want the copy of that, please let me know. All right, so story of Esther here. This background part we have talked about, so I won't spend any great time on it. But first we want to see this is during the reign of this Persian king that the scripture calls Ahasuerus. It's a real. By the way, we know the Jews made fun of his name. And I won't tell you all the ways they made fun of his name, but they made fun of his name in a very derogatory way. So the book spans about a 10-year period in between 483 and 473. However, the king reigned from 486 to 465. So we see that. We know him by Xerxes, lots of history about him. Xerxes is probably the Greek translation of his Persian name, and so that's how we know him historically. He's the successor of Darius, under whom the Temple of Jerusalem was rebuilt back in 520 to 516. You read about that in the book of Ezra. As I said, we've mentioned these things, so I'm just going to go through them quickly. Susa was one of 4 Persian capitals from which the Persian kings reigned. So it's a place where they would go at different parts of the seasons of the year, and so this particular story happens when they're in Susa. Okay, so going beyond that, let's talk a little bit about the unique character of the book. We've touched on some of this, but we want to slow down now and talk about it a little bit more. First and foremost, if you took out every occurrence of the word Jew from this story, you would have no reason to think this was a biblical record or that this should be added into the Bible. It would just be as secular as it could be, and probably would have been stuffed aside and lost in the midst of thousands of other unique stories that have taken place in history. Been nothing to it. But instead, this name Jew, that is the only thing that goes through it that gives you any connection whatsoever with God, is there in the book, and that's what we want to discover. Why is this book then so unique in that way than all other books of the Bible? So even though the name Jew is there, there's nothing Jewish in the book. Did you notice that? What are the things that you would say were Jewish, that should have been Jewish and mentioned in the book? What were things you would expect if this is a Jewish book?
The Sabbath, at least.
Okay, how about a Sabbath day? Exactly. Where's the Sabbath day? No mention. Mark.
It mentions fasting, but it doesn't say fasting.
Exactly.
Sackcloth and ashes.
Lots of nations fasted. Lots of peoples fasted. We would expect fasting and prayer when we saw that. And we go fasting and, whoa, where's that? Just fasting. And you don't see Esther saying one word about everybody appeal to God. That would be what you would expect. Nope, not that. What other Jewish things that you would expect?
At least food rituals. Food.
Okay, yeah, food rituals, festivals, all the 3 yearly feasts, the various other things. There's all kinds of things that you would expect. Synagogues? No mention of that. So it is as secular as you could possibly be. Doesn't even seem to be a concern for God, for His law. Nothing is ascribed to God. Never once does the writer say, oh, if it hadn't have been for God, or something like that. So very, very unique. No other book in the Bible would come close to having a style this way. which is the reason, by the way, that there are many over the history of the last couple of thousand years or so who have complained that Esther was even in the Bible. It is some would even say, a disgusting, gross story that should never have been placed in the pages of Holy Scripture. That's the way it's looked at. So we want to, of course, spend some time justifying that a little bit. Key characters of the book. Exemplary heroes like you would find in other books. Anybody see the greatness of Daniel in somebody here in this book? No? You find nothing at all. As a matter of fact, you see quite the opposite in this. Esther has no concern for dietary issues, like Daniel did. She has no concern about her own Jewish identity. She will not advertise that. She loses her virginity before marriage to a Gentile king by winning a beauty contest. I mean, if you can't find anything more disgusting than that, I mean, that just grosses everybody out. What gets me is for how many years have we Christians read and studied Esther, and what do we do with the story? We glorify her. We say, oh, she's just marvelous. And Mordecai was just the cat's meow. I mean, this is just, we are trying our best to read something into the book that doesn't exist, which is making a huge mistake when we're trying to discover the original message. You don't need to help it out. You need to let it go. You need to see what's taking place here. So there's just all of this stuff, and then even her urging an extra day to kill the enemies. Yay, team! Let's just murder some more of them. I mean, they're already going, help!
It's more along the lines of Samson, the story of Samson.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A little bit. A little bit, even though God is mentioned all the way through Samson's story, God is obviously with him. Yeah. Now Samson wasn't a tremendously moral fellow. That is certainly true. And then you transfer that to like Mordecai. He's very secular, though a Jew. Urges and supports Esther in her attempt to become a queen. By this beauty contest, sleeping with the king for one night, etc. He triggers the murder of the Jews just because he won't show any honor to Haman. I mean, come on, man. What is that? And so you're just seeing these anomalies that go on throughout the book that is quite interesting. In other words, summarizing this, the book is simply uniquely non-religious. I mean, after all, does anybody worship in the book? Anything? You don't have a worship of an idol, much less a worship of God. You don't see any worship in the book.
Does God command anything?
No, absolutely
When
not.
they decide to kill 75,000 women, children,
No, I didn't.
God's hands aren't on that.
No, God didn't say to do that. There's nothing in there to suggest that this was anything here was directly commanded by God. Jerry.
Well, I saw that Mordecai, he had said when they wanted everybody to bow down to Haman, I can't pronounce his name. He wanted everybody to bow down to him because he was it. So everybody should worship him and bow down to him. But I thought it was interesting when Mordecai says, I'm not going to do that because I'm a Jew.
Okay, I don't think so.
I thought I remembered.
Yeah, don't think so. He just says let's make sure of that. Okay, so I don't want to say something that isn't so. But you go over here to be chapter 2, right? That where it is? Yes. Okay, and somebody finds it, let me know. Is it chapter 3? Yeah.
Chapter 3, verse 4.
Verse 4. And when they spoke to him day after day, well, okay, verse 3. Verse 3. And the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Verse 2. And all the king's servants were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Now see, this is not, he didn't say anything about, I'm a Jew, I'm not doing this. Plus, this isn't about worshiping. There's nothing in this about worshiping him. It is about he is higher than you, and you are to give honor to him.
Read the next couple of verses.
A little louder.
The next, read 3 and 4.
3 and 4, okay.
Read it all, let's see.
Didn't he say Jewish nation?
That may be.
And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see what Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Yeah, he told. Yeah, okay, that's where you get good, Sherry. But he told them he's a Jew. But there's nothing said about. So what? So what? Yeah, Danny.
Well, this is kind of in contrast to what Daniel did. Daniel recognized that he was in a subservient position. He just asked for consideration.
Yeah, and that was, of course, eating the food and stuff. And this is also different than Daniel or his 3 friends bowing down to an image. That's not what's taking place here. You will see in the reign of King David or other kings in the Bible that when people come before the king, they bow. So that's the idea. It's not something different than that. Yeah, sure.
I may be wrong, but wasn't it the Jewish law? Wasn't it the Jewish law that you should bow down to no man?
As an idol or a worship object, sure. Yeah.
And I don't know. I just thought that's where he got that from. That since he was a Jew, he was taught not to bow down to anybody.
Yeah. Well, again, people came in and bowed down to David, King David, and they weren't bowing to him as a god. They were just bowing to him because he's the king. That was quite common, and we honestly would have, if it were the tradition of how you met a ruler, that you bowed before the ruler, then that would be what you would do, and it wouldn't be that you're called a king. Yeah, John.
Didn't they save the whole Jewish nation from being destroyed?
Yeah. Well, see, that hasn't happened yet in this.
That right here, because when he said he was going to destroy them, he had the authority. They had the authority. The rules had all been sent out, kill them all, and then they stopped it.
Yes, exactly. But when you're at chapter 3, when Mordecai first wouldn't bow, there had been no decree yet. That's the only thing I'm saying. So, yeah, that decree is going to come after that. There's no doubt about it, because Haman is really angry. He's angry that Mordecai wouldn't bow. So that's what I'm pointing out as a trigger there.
Well, I think you have to kind of make one of two assumptions here. Because I agree, I don't think this is about idol worship and that Haman's saying, I'm God, so you have to bow down. Either, potentially you say, Mordecai sounds super stubborn, and he's got some issues he's got to deal with. Another potential here, though, is that Mordecai recognizes that Haman is an Agagite,
right,
and that the relationship that he and Haman have has a few ancestral issues with it, and because of that, he's refusing to bow down.
Yeah, and I believe that absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to get into that in not a moment tonight, but in a moment next week. We will get into that, and just as John said, there is a rub here between what Haman is and what Mordecai is doing. It's just at this point in the story, this is what I want you to see, at this point in the story, you're kind of throwing your hands up and going, what? I mean, I remember years and years and years ago reading this and going, what are you doing, Mordecai? But then you read this Agagite picture, and then you're realizing something quite different is going on. You know, Esther, Mordecai, and all the Jews mentioned in this book are not ones who returned to Jerusalem, not ones who, when the decree went out by Cyrus, that you could go back and build the temple, you could go back and build your home. These Jews don't do it. That's interesting.
They probably never lived in
it came.
Well, some of them wouldn't have, but of course, most of the people who went back to build Jerusalem and rebuild it had not been, had not been that way. Some of the older ones had, but that was the way it is. So anyway, we're looking at that unique character. We'll pick that up next week. Please bring your sheet back, and we will go on looking at big picture of the story. Thank you.